The Spirit, who is mind and heart and vast spaces, enfolds the whole universe, and in silence is loving to all. This is the Spirit in my heart. The following texts are extracts from a series of 6 talks John Main gave to the Religious of the Sacred Heart here in Montreal shortly after his arrival. Not only the nuns, but also some of the old pupils, of whom I'm one. They were entitled, there were a series of 6 talks over a week entitled A Way for Today, the Dynamic of Love and Prayer. As you will see, they are one and the same. So here goes John Main. I am not going to talk to you at all about prayers, nor in the first place about praying. I make this small clarification at the beginning because it is generally when people think of prayer as being about prayer to God or praying to God that they end up confused. I suppose most of us in this room have received a religious education that left us, perhaps for many barren years, in the desert of spiritual materialism. By that I mean the habit of thinking about the spiritual dimension of our lives in materialistic terms. We all have in our heads all sorts of models in which we base and understand our behavior. To a large degree, we need these models in order to be able to live our complex lifestyles at all the different levels on which we are called to operate. But the wrong type of model can very seriously disrupt us. It can throw us off the rails, even without our knowing it, and shatter the harmony we are trying to achieve in our life, in our person. You will probably agree that the spiritual dimension that we all have is the central one of our life. We may not spend so much time bothering about it as we do about our careers or our families, but we know all the time that it is there, silent, persistent, quietly sensitive, whether we are aware of it or not. It is there that the mystery of our being alive at all is to be found, a mystery that fascinates us and can even frighten us. And therefore everything else in our life depends upon this dimension, because it is in our spirit that we begin to be. The most prevalent religious model of our time has been based on an analogy with the educational course. A course in which we assemble credits. So many for going to Mass on Sunday, so many for saying the rosary, night prayers, morning prayers, and of course, what a bonus of credits. What a bonus of credits we get from a course on prayer. This is a type of spiritual materialism that the younger generation have rejected. And they rejected it above all, perhaps, because our generation had already lost real belief in it when it came to passing it on. We had come to know at a deeper level of our being that this is a hopeless model for religious behavior, because it does not in any way correspond to the reality, to the mystery of our spirit. Now, when our religious expression and our spiritual reality slip out of sequence, It is not long before religion first fossilizes and then crumbles. But without the necessary externalization of our inner life, and without the opportunity for really joyous sharing and celebration of this life, our spirits suffer. But the air is for our bodies, the experience of being in relationship is for our spirits. The spirit cannot, of course, be destroyed, but it can be deeply wounded, and it can suffer the great agony of spiritual loneliness. Prayer, in a sense, is about spiritual relationship, or about relationship. Our relationship with God, of course, but in a sense that this relationship is the sum total of all our relationships with other people, and our relationship with ourselves. Prayer is the sum total of all of this, unified in Jesus, redeemed by his love, held by him in equilibrium, harmony, and peace. The model for the spirit, for religion, for prayer that we should have is not an institutional, intellectual, or mechanical one, but a fully personal one. This is the model most deeply presented to us, the model of love. It is the simplest model we could use to consider this part of our life, and it is also the truest. You will remember the simplest and truest statement in the Bible, St. John's 3 short words. God is love. Before we can enter as fully into the mystery of prayer, as we are each summoned to do, we must not only make peace with others, but we must also be reconciled to ourselves. Now, it is true that prayer itself is a healing force in our lives, but it is prayer that makes us whole, restores us to ourselves, not prayers or saying prayers. And to discover prayer, we must at least have begun to discover ourselves. This is why prayer is associated with maturity. The childish, the infantile cannot enter into the mystery of prayer. Instead, as the letter to the Hebrews puts it, let us advance towards maturity. We do not have to remain at the immature level of discussing the rudiments of Christianity. We are called to go further than mere discussion and speculation, and to enter into the mature experience that lies at the center, at the heart of the Christian mystery. We do not have to be perfect to find this force of prayer in ourselves, but we do at least have to believe in ourselves, to believe that we have the call and the possibility to be perfect. What this means in terms of the model I'm putting before you is coming to an awareness of our own lovableness. The word love drops easily from our lips today, and yet the tragedy of our time is that so few have had any real experience of love. Many sham experiences go by the name. Many commercialized experiences trade on the name. But the actual experience of love is something quite different, quite unique. It is relatively easy to recognize a genuine experience because it brings about a complete and permanent rearrangement of the priorities of our life to the man or woman who has had a real experience of love, that experience is simply the most important thing in their lives. If I was to ask each of you what is or was the most marvelous experience of your life, and if you were to reply, winning the Quebec lottery, or the first time I owned an electric toaster, or when I was made president of my corporation, then I would be bound to think, and I suspect you would agree, that your life experience had been very limited. What does it profit us to gain the whole world if we have never known love? And not to know love is the same as having lost our soul. What many, I hope all of you, will know is what an indescribable, wonderful, and sudden transformation takes place in us, in our attitude to life and the world when we discover an experience of love. The world is recreated for us, and we feel as if we had just been created afresh for it. G.K. Chesterton, in one of his better moments, wrote a marvelous description of the experience of waking up one day suddenly to realize that another human being loved him, that there was someone for whom his own existence was a source of pure and perfect delight, not because he was famous or clever or attractive, but because he was. Chesterton's good fortune was to experience himself verified, affirmed. We know ourselves, know that we really exist, and that our existence is in itself delightful and joyful, and as an author of the Genesis put it, very good. When we have meaning in the heart of another person. Now, the one who knows that he is not loved, perhaps because he has accepted this deprivation as a necessary price for his successful career or craft, would retort, nonsense, pain itself tells us that we are, that affirms us. In a tragic sense, that is indeed partially true. Many people do only know themselves in a shadowy, spectral sort of way, by knowing the pain of lovelessness. But this is not the same as knowing ourselves to be whole, harmonious, because we are loved. This is not to recognize that we are free, that we possess an infinite capacity for the expansion of our heart by love, an infinite capacity for the expansion of our whole consciousness. It is as if I were to describe someone to you so vividly that you felt he was there with us, but when I stopped talking, you realized it was only words, and you suddenly felt the pain of the absence of the real person. This is another point I would like to put before you, the actual difference between what is real, present, and what is unreal and absent. It seems an obvious distinction, but many people live a blurred life between the two, refusing to accept that there is a gap, an absence in their lives. That state is what we call illusion or fantasy. It is the seedbed of all fears and anxieties, and it is the absolute opposite of prayer. What this means is that we can only be in contact with reality if we are in contact with ourselves, and we only feel ourselves. We only become verified and affirmed by love. Love is, then, the supreme reality of life. because it makes reality real. The whole span of a human life is, or should be, a maturing, a deepening of our experience of love, an ever greater affirmation of our existence. We begin with the experience of our parents' love for us. That gives us enough self-confidence to make friends of our own. Then we discover the capacity for real love, for delighting in another person's existence, for his or her own sake. And that leads us into personal, intimate love, from where we really begin our human pilgrimage to fullness of being, which is the complete experience of love in its most personal form. This is all a natural human process of growth that leads us into an ever-deepening awareness of the centrality of love, both for ourselves and the universe, an awareness that everything proceeds from love, is held together by love, works together in love, and returns to love. Let me repeat this. Everything proceeds from love, is held together by love, works together in love, and returns to love. This process of deepening awareness begins with our simple, open experience of being loved, and it is also the pilgrimage of prayer that we are all called to follow. This perhaps sounds unsettlingly abstract and platonic, especially for those of us used to the somewhat materialistic spirituality that sees prayers as an activity, a message we send up to God. But I think it becomes clearer if you think of the difference between saying that someone is prayerful and saying he or she is always saying prayers. It is the same when we speak of human love. If we say a person is very loving, we are saying something about the enduring, deep essence of their personhood. To say, on the other hand, that someone is a great lover could mean a lot of things, but does not suggest he's living out of the central reality of his life, that he is all the time in equal contact with all parts of his being, that he is whole, integral. Prayer is such a state of being that opens up an awareness in ourselves that contains, pervades, and comprehends every corner of our life. It is a continuous, dynamic presence, but just as in a loving human relationship, there are times when it bursts into flame, and we celebrate an epiphany of love. Worship and religious ritual are such epiphanies, and they have meaning and revelatory power to the extent that they really are externalizing something, celebrating something. If they do not, then they suffer from the materialistic hollowness, the insincerity of an anniversary present given out of duty or fear in a relationship that is no longer loving. Sincerity, though, is a dangerous word. The contemporary cult of sincerity, always asking, am I really sincere, has emotionally paralyzed more people than it has led to authenticity. The precise danger of concern about sincerity is that it is a self-centered awareness. Am I really sincere? Is it right that I should say this? And so we run up against the paradox that the scrupulously sincere person can be the least loving, just as that now rather rarer type tortured by religious scruples. Was it 3 weeks and a day, or 3 weeks and 2 days since my last confession? Was spiritually paralyzed. The difference between love and lust, or love and complete isolation, is the same difference between prayer and religiosity. Love is always other-centered, and we bring to the other the deep center of our own being as gift, as sacrifice. In love, the question of sincerity does not arise. All such self-consciousness is burned away by the light of the real experience of love. Our progression in love is measured by the depth of our utter and complete other-centeredness, which makes the complete gift and sacrifice of our whole being a possibility. The supreme example of this is the complete kenosis, emptying of self, that took place in Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. We all learned at school that God created the world and keeps it in being, that he created us and keeps us in being. We learned it and believed it as we learned about the North Pole. Similarly, we still believe that the North Pole is there, but because we have not personally verified its existence, our belief is dependent on someone else's experience. It is not necessary for us to go to the North Pole to verify its existence. It is quite cold enough here to convince us. Oh, he gave this talk in the dead of winter, I suppose. Now it's summer. But we do have to verify the reality of love for ourselves in our personal experience if we are to grow in spirit. Another person's word or teaching is no substitute for our own experience, though it can, of course, be the means that leads us to that experience. Can someone teach you to pray? A teacher can only help you to actualize your own potential, to direct you towards your own mature personal discovery. You don't need a teacher to teach you to love your father and mother, your husband or wife. And prayer being what it is, openness to loving our life, and therefore at the center of our life, is above all a natural part of us, what we are meant for. The religious dilemma of our day that occupies us so much of our time in self-questioning about the future of the Church is due above all to the spiritual immaturity of so many who have not entered into this experience and been examined by it. Their immaturity consists either in their never having known love, and therefore never having the opportunity to build their model of love, or in never realizing that their experience of human love demands to be carried through into the fulfilled in their awareness of the power of God at work within them. The maturity of spirit to which the gospel invites us is just this: the degree of awareness we have that the love we are experiencing, whether it's parental love, friendship, or married love, is a real participation in the life of God. You will perhaps be thinking, but where does this awareness begin? This all sounds fine for people who have the time to take it that far. As for me, I love my wife or husband and my children. But in all honesty, I can't see that it has much to do with God. My wife and children are here with me. Isn't God supposed to be transcendent after all? The fact that this is so common a response today reveals how far we have been alienated from the basic Christian experience. The answer to the question, Where does this awareness that love is central to all life and is all a manifestation of God begin? Is this. It begins in me, in the silent center of my being, where I, like every human being, have received the Spirit of the risen Christ. We can see the same depth of love, a sharing in the depth that Jesus opened up for as a possibility for humanity in St. Paul. You may remember that strangely luminous passage, which should sound sacrilegious and yet radiates authentic holiness, where he declares he would willingly lose the love of Christ, that is his most treasured possession, would indeed be cast out from the company of the redeemed, if his own destruction could lead to the salvation of those he loved. Prayer is truly an awareness of reality, an openness to love, to the degree that its inner dynamic is a real turning away from self, from all self-consciousness. But at this point, we need to be honest and very courageous. We must be prepared to lay aside our more infantile religious concepts and begin this pilgrimage towards real religious perceptions. And we do need courage to be able to admit what we have to say at the beginning of the pilgrimage, that the only reality I know is myself. Now we live in an age of anxiety that is equally an age of unbelief. And yet so many of our contemporaries long to be able to say, I believe. The problem for them is not the word believe, but the problem I. But the word I. Before we can say I believe, I love, we have to have a firm grasp on our own identity, a grasp that is born out of our own experience of ourselves, not manufactured for us as one of the stereotypes of our commercialized society. The religious journey, the pilgrimage of prayer, depends upon this grasp of its start as its starting point, if it is to enjoy any personal authenticity or have any power to inspire and communicate to others. All education should contribute to this end, that each of us in our educational environment do actually experience ourselves through knowing that we are honored, respected, and loved. What is true of the school is true of the home. We need community, not institutions, for the development of mature, self-confident persons. The basic unit is, of course, a family, where the grounding experience of being loved is first received. And the most important feature of the family, more important than praying together, is that everyone learns to experience themselves honored, loved, unique. For it is above all by knowing that we are known and accepted that we can come to know and accept ourselves, and to be confident in our own personhood, confident enough to leave ourselves behind in love when the moment of love is given. I hope I'm making it clear that this is not a doctrine of self-obsession. In the words of T.S. Eliot, home is where we start from. And in prayer we start with ourselves, where we are. Writing in an age far less complicated than our own, the England of the 14th century, the author of The Cloud of Unknowing composed a classic introduction to Christian prayer that retains an extraordinary relevance for our complex, confused society. He told his disciple that if he would begin to pray to start out on what he calls the work, then he must take himself as the starting point. Go no further, but rest in this naked, stark, elemental awareness that you are as you are. What we are talking about is self-awareness, not self-fixation. Talking about a unified consciousness, not a divided one. The self that is obsessed with its own nature, its own mechanism, tries perhaps to fool itself that it is praying to God, talking to God, when it is merely wandering in a maze of mirrors, trapped as a victim of its own self-consciousness. And self-consciousness never leads into a real freedom of prayer, because it is threatened in its own existence by the reality of otherness, and so it languishes under the curse of the observing self. We are all somewhat aware of this divided consciousness, but how do we become whole, unified, reconciled to ourselves? What is the source of our personal integration? What makes us wholesome? We have come now to an important part of this exposition because we have found the right question that should be able to lead us out of the maze of the divided self into the freedom of prayer, the glorious liberty of the children of God. As one of the Desert Fathers puts it, you are next door to understanding if you carefully recognize what you ought to ask about. And you are not far from knowledge if you are beginning to understand how ignorant you are. This is from Cassian, conference number 10. The healing force that makes us whole, that leads us to the wholeness, that is holiness, is love. And prayer is our awareness of and receptivity to love. This is not a passive, one-sided affair. It is so true that the inattentive is always with God. It's true that the initiative is always with God, because He created us, because He's the source of being, the source of love itself. This is why St. John makes a distinction. The love I speak of is not our love for God, but the love He showed us. Prayer is an awareness of this love of God for us as the central fact of our life. Not merely a pious formula, but a central fact, indeed the central reality of all creation. To begin with, do not bother about making sincere response to this fact, or about entering into relationship with God. Loving God is something so natural to us as His creatures that we only complicate ourselves and our relationship if we're always trying to love God. Imagine what a state you and your children would be if you were always trying to love them. First of all, let this awareness be formed in you. In the words of the song, be still and know that I am God. As much as we have to worry about anything in prayer, worry only about this, becoming still, becoming aware. The mystery of our prayer consists in this, and it is the same mystery inherent in all loving, a mystery we need courage to enter. Because prayer is awareness of another, the other. We have to learn to direct the entirety of our consciousness onto the other. The discomfort of this for us is that we must leave our self-consciousness behind us when we do it. And however much one may be discontented with the kind of person our self-consciousness makes us, however much we want to shed it, when the time and opportunity of shedding it occurs, we inevitably pull back. Or rather, our ego pulls us back into the comforting routine of our illusions. The slyness of our devil is nothing compared to the wiliness of our ego. But there is no alternative, no easy way. To become aware of the reality of love, to pray, we have to go beyond all images of ourselves and all images of God if we are to find this simple, wholehearted, other-centeredness. And we have to leave these images behind, because any image of God we have in our mind is essentially an image of ourselves, coming as it does out of the self-fixated consciousness of the self-obsessed imagination. We all know what we are sadly capable of seeing people as we create them in our minds, and can often miss the real otherness of them because of our preoccupations and prejudices, desires, or fears. It is the same with prayer. In prayer, we turn to the other as he is, not as we would have him be. And so we do not imagine him or think about him. We simply allow ourselves to come to harmonious awareness of his pure, loving existence. As the philosopher Heidegger puts it, in the presence of mystery, we must be still and let the mystery be. This always requires courage, what St. Paul meant by faith, because even with the assurance of being loved and with the support of a community of the faithful, the way of prayer can seem negative, even nihilistic. To begin with, we must simply take it on trust. We must simply make a leap of faith and believe that in turning away from the darkness, we are beginning to take our first faltering step towards entering a loving relationship with love itself. We have to believe against all appearances that simply in turning away from ourselves, we are making a pure act of love. And as St. John tells us, love must not be a matter of words or talk. It must be genuine and show itself in action. If this seems hard doctrine to follow, it is the central message that Jesus came to teach. No man can be a follower of mine unless he leaves self behind. The man who would find his life must first lose it. Familiarity is said to breed contempt, but it can also breed sheer deafness. We can become so familiar with these words of Jesus, merely as words, that we fail to hear them, to listen. The parable of the sower should be constant warning against our responsiveness and sensitivity becoming dull and uncreative. What we need constantly to be deepening is our understanding that love is an abiding presence among the shifting sands of our life. And this understanding must be both mature and personal. We have to understand that love is the free choice of a conscious being to turn away from self towards another. It is the choice Jesus invites us to make. The Christian revelation that separates us, our era, from all preceding ones, is that we can accept this invitation in its fullness, that each of us can make this courageous step away from ourselves towards the other. We can make this leap of faith into the unknown by turning away from ourselves. We can open up our awareness of the depth of our being precisely because Jesus has made the leap before us. We can He has leapt over the abyss, reached the other side, and he has placed a bridge across it, linking us to himself. That bridge is his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and where it touches our side of the abyss is in the heart, at the living center and source of our being. The discovery of this reality in our own personal experience is the essential Christian experience. It is the source of our hope. And such a hope is no mockery, because God's love has flooded our inmost heart through the Holy Spirit He has given us. St. Paul to Romans. The indwelling of the Spirit is not something we have to achieve or make happen by being good or religious. Despite the fact that we are divided, scattered, unfaithful, the Spirit pervades our being, always linking us to the full reality of the unified, whole, faithful, and loving risen Lord. It remains for us only to become aware of the presence of this Spirit in our inmost being. And there's nothing complex, esoteric, or privileged about this awareness. Prayer demands our whole being, but it is simplicity itself. We come to this openness to deepen our awareness. We need to learn only how to listen, to be attentive. This is quite the opposite of being passive. It means that we don't have to create anything or imagine anything. But we have to be alert, attentive, to concentrate, and this means we must learn to be silent. Eckhart said that there is nothing like God than silence. Silence without which prayer is impossible. Silence is a spiritual catalyst that enables us to realize the presence of the infinite love of God in our heart. It is the simplest of human response. Let me close with a piece of paper I found amongst Father John's things, letters, clerical collars and such. It is by Maurice Maeterlinck. Silence is the element in which great things fashion themselves together, that at length they may emerge full-formed and majestic into the daylight of life, which they are henceforth to rule. Speech is of time, silence is of eternity. It is only when life is sluggish within us that we speak. Only at the moment when reality lies far away and we do not wish to be conscious of brethren. And no sooner do we speak than something warns us that the divine gates are closing. There is an instinct of the superhuman truth within us which warns us that it is dangerous to be silent with one whom we do not wish to know or do not love. For words may pass between people, but let silence have its instant of activity, and it will never efface itself. Thank you.
Listen to these words from the letter to the Ephesians. St. Paul is speaking of what Jesus has achieved. In him, that is in Jesus, we have access to God with freedom, in the confidence born of trust in him. Meditation can, in some ways, I think, be likened to climbing a 100-foot pole. As you all know, there's nothing particularly difficult about climbing a pole, once you know how to do it. It requires perseverance. And at times, perhaps you just have to hang on. But to get to the top of the pole, there is no alternative but to keep on climbing. As you get higher, it might be that the view improves. And you can be tempted to stop, to suspend your climbing, so that you can look at the view. And I suppose this is not entirely bad, because you cannot help suspecting that the view will be even better at the top. But then, as you keep on going up, you're quite likely to get into the clouds. And then you have no view, and you have no way of knowing that you are really making any progress, except your own commitment to the climbing of one step at a time. And then the clouds clear. And you discover that you were right to keep on climbing. And the view now is more magnificent than ever. And you appreciate it much more after going through all the clouds. And now that you can almost see the top of the pole, you are really encouraged to keep on climbing. But then very often at this stage, you begin to wonder, why am I climbing? Can the view from the top be that much better? And what is the purpose of the whole exercise? Is it just for the view? But by now, you've got used to climbing. And so you decide to go on until you get to the top. And then finally, one day, you are at the top. And the view is indeed enthralling. And at this stage, we are usually quite pleased with ourselves. We've stayed the course. We've persevered. And just then, an angel of the Lord is beside us. And very quietly, the angel tells us, you must jump. You must leap. You must abandon the pole. And this is the moment when we begin to understand that our faith, our commitment to Christ, if we would enter into this full liberty of spirit, our commitment must be absolute. Everything we are, everything we have accomplished, must be placed at his disposition. And at this stage, in the face of this extraordinary insight that is given to us, many of us decide to postpone our leap, to postpone our jump, our commitment in faith. And postponing the moment of commitment is a terrible scourge, and one that afflicts all of us, I think, to some degree. Tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, perhaps. I will take it all absolutely seriously. But for the moment, I will admire the view. And I'll try to hang on as best I can. And then I will leap. But in the wonderful mercy of God, the angel of the Lord comes to our aid again. And the angel says to us, you must leap now. You must not just admire the view. You must become one with it. The view is all creation. And the call that each one of us has, every one of us has, is to take our full place in this marvelous vision of harmony, of peace, of oneness. And the angel of the Lord says to us, you can't just be stuck here on the top of this ridiculous pole. Leap. Leap into understanding, into life, and into love. Every time we meditate, that is our invitation. To be on the way, to be utterly committed to the way. As we all know, Jesus tells us, I am the way. Listen to how St. Paul goes on. With all this in mind, then, I kneel in prayer to the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name, that out of the treasures of his glory he may grant you strength and power through his Spirit in your inner being, that through faith Christ may dwell in your hearts in love, with deep roots and firm foundations. May you be strong to grasp with all God's people what is the breadth and length and height and depth of the love of Christ, and to know it, though it is beyond knowledge. So may you attain to fullness of being, the fullness of God himself. That is our leap into the fullness of God.